Hello and welcome to the very first episode of Help Me, I'm Poor, the money podcast that's more Fritz Bernays than Forex. I'm Claire.
And I'm Ellie, and each week we discuss how money shows up in your favourite pop culture, from the nostalgic to the contemporary.
Before we get into it properly, we wanted to tell you a bit about why we wanted to start this podcast, because it's not a straight up money podcast. It's not a straight up pop culture podcast. It's somewhere in the middle. And I think what we really thought was we need a fun, enjoyable way to talk about this stuff. And what better way than through these characters that we have known for such a long time. Their choices probably have informed some of our financial decisions.
Totally.
We connect with them on an emotional level. And as millennials, we sort of just have this really special thing, which is this shared culture of movies and TV shows and books that we all watched and read, and that are so quotable, that are so relatable. And yeah, we just, as we started talking about it, we realized what a massive role money plays in so many of these things, especially the one that we're going to be talking about today.
Absolutely. I'm so excited that we're here and that we're doing this. And we really hope that you love this episode and you love the series as much as we do. So if you do, please do share, subscribe. We're going to be on YouTube with full episodes every week, and we cannot wait to hear what you think. If you've got any suggestions of shows, books, films that you'd love us to cover, then please do DM us. So let's go.
Yeah, and you can DM us on Instagram or TikTok. You can find us at Help Me, I'm Poorcast. So this week, for our very first episode, obviously, we had to delve into the fictional finances of the characters from the movie Bridesmaids. The more eagle-eyed of our listeners or viewers will have spotted that that's where we got the name from, very much paying homage to an icon of the 2010s. And honestly, when I did my rewatch of this movie, so we know it as a film that's like predominantly about female friendship. It is also a rom-com. We've got Chris O'Dowd's character like sort of playing the romantic lead, but he's not in it very much. It's much more about the relationship between the two female leads. But when I was doing the rewatch, I realized how much it is a film about money. Like, it's such a plot point throughout the whole film, right from the very first scene. And I think, you know, we open with Annie and Lillian. They are best friends since childhood, and we see them. They have this like scrappy camaraderie. They both seem like they're winging things quite a lot. They're like stealing a boot camp in the first scene that we see them together from Terry Crews, who I'd forgotten was in this film. And so he is shouting at them while they're trying to do his workout from behind a tree. And they're running off shouting like, "Sorry, Rodney," or whatever his name is, "we're on a budget." But then the movie kind of moves quite quickly through to this realization that Annie is sort of headed in one direction in her life, and Lillian is headed in a different direction. And so we have the engagement, and it all starts to unravel from there.
I think just before we kind of get into the ins and outs of it, I'm so excited that we are talking about this film, because I think that so many of us, we really will be able to relate to this. Just thinking back to when this first came out, and obviously when it came out, you know, I thought this was hilarious. It is a funny film. But I was 18, and at 18, my life looked very similar to the life of a lot of my friends. And now, 14 years later, we are in our early 30s. And those differences that we see in that film have really started to manifest and to kind of come to fruition. And I think at the time when I first saw it, I was like, oh, you know, that probably won't be us. You know, we won't see this happen.
Yeah.
Now rewatching it, it's kind of like that aha moment, and that, okay, so they were literally spelling out what happened. And obviously it's very exaggerated, but what so many of us experience as we do go through our 20s and then especially into your 30s as well.
Yeah, I think it's such a good observation, actually, of that fact. And I've seen this talked about quite a lot in recent years. It comes up in Alex Holder's book, Open Up,
Yes.
where she talks about that thing of like when you're at university or like college in the States, everyone's sort of in that same like skint student boat. And then as soon as you graduate, it really quickly becomes apparent who has got access to certain parts of the world and who hasn't.
And also, I think the other thing as well is it's the impact of the jobs.
Yeah.
So even if you are at that situation when you leave uni and you graduate and you are in a similar situation, your choices about career then really start to diverge your financial means.
Yeah. And I think the really important thing that there is to say about Bridesmaids is that Kristen Wiig's character, Annie, and I have to say, rewatching this and rediscovering the joy of this film made me fully forgive Kristen Wiig for her participation in the Lockdown Imagine video. Because she's redeemed herself retroactively in my eyes because her performance in this film, she is such a brilliant comic actress. Her slapstick is amazing. But I think it's really important to note that her character has had like really bad luck. So if we want to do like a brief summary of the plot before we talk more about themes, we open with Annie and Lillian and they're a bit scrappy. On the way back from that scene where they're stealing the boot camp in the park, they walk past Annie's sort of closed and dilapidated bakery and they have a short conversation about how she opened a bakery, started a business during the recession. Obviously, this is 2011, so we're not that far past credit crunch 2008 time. So this will be pain that I think quite a lot of people in the audience will have been able to resonate with. But she's lost everything. She makes numerous references throughout the film about sort of losing all of her money. She had the business with a partner who left her when the business failed. She's now flat sharing with Matt Lucas and Rebel Wilson, who are siblings. I think they're supposed to be British, but the accents are they're questionable, let's say. But yeah, she's flat sharing with them. She's a woman in her 30s. She's got no privacy, no boundaries. I think this is something that is really pertinent to today when we're finding, you know, the shape of the economy has changed so much that lots of people in their 30s are in flat shares and house shares, especially if they're living in London. But there's stuff where, you know, Rebel Wilson's character has been reading her diary, which she says she thought was just a very sad handwritten book, which is just like the gems that come up when you rewatch. But so she's in a really difficult place and it's really hard for her then to see her friend. She's marrying into a wealthy family. She has got this new circle of friends and everything that they're doing together is kind of out of Annie's reach. There's lots of anecdotes and in-jokes from like expensive restaurants or big holidays that they've been on together. And so she feels quite closed out. And I think that there's then that progression throughout the plot of her not being able to afford to keep up. There's, you know, and also every time she tries to do things on a budget, like going to the Brazilian restaurant, we all know how that ends with that like very graphic scene in the Bridesmaids in the bridal shop. And so and then she's sort of trying to nudge things in a more affordable direction when it comes to bridesmaids dresses as well.
I think one thing that I find quite interesting kind of to take from this discussion, like just to step back out of the film and to like think about the context of this, is actually just obviously we really relate to Annie and we feel for her and her situation. But when you look at Lillian and her situation, is it okay, or how do we navigate being in her situation, because I think that we often, watching the film, obviously like focus on Annie, but I think that it's really interesting to look at Lillian, because in a way, is it fair to just expect her to still also live in the way that Annie lives? Because I don't think it is. And I think sometimes she gets judged quite harshly. And don't get me wrong, I think that she does things throughout the film that are not great. I think she definitely could be a better friend. But I also think that we do have to also think, okay, how could she navigate this better? But in a way that is also kind of authentic to her circumstances, because it's not realistic to expect a friend who has got more money to always live in a way that is consistent with the person that has the least money. It's, I guess, maybe more about how do you navigate it in a sensitive way.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting because like so many of these things, sort of like the crux of the problem comes down a bit to the communication.
Yeah.
And so Lillian is very passive in all situations. She's trying to appease lots of different people. But there is, I think it's really tricky, because part of me wants to say, I think that if you're in a group, it's good to try and cater to the smallest budget, because otherwise you're excluding somebody. Yeah. But at the same time, if you want to have these experiences, and, you know, the kind of the first like real climax of the film, in terms of these confrontations with affordability, happens on the plane to Vegas. And I had completely forgotten that they do not go to Vegas. The plane is grounded and they have to get the bus back to Milwaukee. I had clearly invented loads of Vegas scenes in my head because I thought that they went. But anyway, you know, it is an absolutely iconic scene, kind of the snapshot of her poking her head through the first class curtain with her sunglasses on, where she's like basically trying to disguise herself. But when that like first confrontation comes up, are we expecting everybody else to join her in coach? And in fact, I'd forgotten as well that Helen says that she had offered pay for Annie to go in first class. But I wonder if there's something in that as well. Why do we not accept help from people who genuinely can afford it more than us? Is it because we've bought into this kind of belief that if you have more money, it means that you've worked harder for it, and you shouldn't take someone else's money because it's theirs? Or
is it a shame because it's an acceptance that we aren't in those circumstances, and a kind of a denial and not wanting to admit, actually, I would like the help, because we see that as a weakness. If we say, okay, actually, yeah, I'd love that if you could pay for me because I can't currently afford it. It feels like, almost like a resignation, which isn't actually a problem, or it shouldn't be a problem really, because the reality is we are in different circumstances. So many of us are. And again, to come back to Helen, I think that she's a really interesting character, because I do think that when we look at how she behaves, again, there are things that she does, like where she kind of steals the idea about Paris, which I don't think is particularly great. But I think, again, stepping back, Helen is just very wealthy. I think she just wants to, treat Lillian, give her a great experience. I think that potentially Lillian is the person that is failing to manage the different dynamics, because she is the centerpiece. She is the bride, the friend that is aware of everybody's circumstances. And perhaps, I don't know, maybe it's too generous, but Helen doesn't, fully acknowledge the wide gulf in means between them, because she's just used to living in her world and in her bubble. And in the way that I think we sometimes expect, wealthy people to be aware of what's going on for people that have less money, maybe we also should kind of expect Annie to understand a little bit more that like maybe her friend wants to experience some of these things that she can access with her new friends. And I get that that's also really difficult because you probably, if you're Annie, want to be there and do that as well. But it shouldn't also be, I kind of feel like maybe it shouldn't be a reason to stop your friend enjoying those experiences just because you can't. Maybe you just sometimes have to say, I'm really happy for you, like enjoy it, and kind of separate your jealousy.
Yeah, and I think this is where the like scenario of it being a wedding is really important, because it is one of the only occasions where you're having to bring together people from all different areas of your life, and there can be like other kinds of politics around like who slept with whose boyfriend while you were at uni, or like, you know, whose dads don't get on, or you know, all of that stuff. But there is also this thing about you know, economic differences, and I think that's why the wedding and the engagement and all of the stuff leading up to it seems, I think, to be a bit of a catalyst for it, like throws a bit of a light, I think. But going back to what you were saying about Helen, because I think this is, I noticed it so much more when I was watching it, because I've been going through my own sort of journey of like realizing that I really struggle with this myself. Is I think that because she talks about the fact that she doesn't have any female friends, and she says that she thinks that people just want her involved because she's good at planning parties. And I think that she has this like pathological generosity thing where she is throwing money at her friendship with Lillian in an attempt to have like a genuine connection with her. And that makes me feel for her so much. And you know, she is really insensitive. She's very removed from the real world. You can tell. I mean, there's the bridal shower when the driveway is like really long, and then Annie's supposed to like manage this drink without a cup holder. And then the final bit of the journey is done on horseback. It's just like, it's so ridiculous. Far removed from reality. And obviously it's all amplified because it's on screen. But I do think like what constitutes normality for different people is different. But I really felt for Helen on my rewatch, I have to say, of her, like, and I really identified with that thing of I'm nowhere near as wealthy as she is. But any time that I have a bit of extra money, I'm quite often looking for ways to use it to sort of not necessarily even please other people, but to like connect with them or to give them exactly what they want. And she's obviously taken these kernels of ideas from Annie's lifelong friendship with Lillian and then amplified them to the max. And I think that's really interesting. And I think we were also kind of discussing sort of, you know, behind the curtain. We talk about these episodes before we record them. But one of the things that we had talked about was that sometimes when these ideas get overblown from their kind of cheaper, more simple idea,
it loses the charm or like the specialness of it.
And I think like the epitome of that is Lillian's really awful wedding dress.
Oh my gosh.
Because it's so hyped up, the Lady Juju dress. And then when she tries it on, it's like comically bad. There's like this big headdress. Like it's just, she looks like sort of a toilet roll holder, basically. And, you know, the kind of, I think at a point in the film, and she says to Annie, doesn't she, when she's like hiding in her old apartment, that it all just got out of control and overwhelming. And I don't know about you, but I do really resonate with that thing about a wedding getting totally out of control. And I have talked really openly about how, I mean, I started writing and talking about money from a place of having a massive amount of credit card debt, and loads of that was from my wedding. And it was very much like sort of like death by 1,000 cuts.
Yeah.
It was one thing and then it was the next and then it was the next.
Spirals.
And before you know it, you're so deep in.
And I think one of the things that is so fascinating about wedding culture, and I see this a lot in my DMs because every time I talk about weddings, it goes mad. And I find it so fascinating that it's almost as though it's the one place where we have an inability to put a mirror up to ourselves, because you will speak to so many people who all concur that it is out of control. It has got wild, the expectations, the money. And then it gets to somebody's own wedding and then they just do it again.
Yeah.
And they replay the whole thing. And it's like, I think part of it is maybe that sense of like, well, I've done it all for you, for all my friends. So now it's my turn. So I want to go really extra. But I asked for some stories recently about hen parties, and I could talk about hen parties for years because I just think it is utterly insane. And there were many responses which were well into the thousands of pounds that they ended up spending on hens. And there was a real theme actually, that a lot of people ended up going to Ibiza for a long time, like long weekends or a week, and spending £2,500. And the thing that is so mad about this is that I mean, that's a good budget for like a holiday that you want to go on, but this is not a holiday that you're choosing to go on. This is somebody else's plan that you are going to because of them, because you want to support them, you want to enjoy that time with them, but you're not in charge of the schedule. And also, you're probably there with people that you don't know.
Yeah,
you might have some friends,
but
you know, there's probably going to be people that you don't know that you wouldn't choose to go and spend your holiday with, never mind an expensive holiday. And for most people, I think this is the other bit, it isn't just that one wedding. And so when you're asking somebody to go on a hen like that and to spend that much money, I think it's so easy to just forget when you're the bride that, you know, you're not the only person getting married, that most of us go through these seasons where we've got multiple weddings in a year. And one of my closest friends, she has a lot of friends to be fair, but she, I think, a year or two ago had maybe 13 weddings in a year. And that's not just the weddings, because you've also then got the hens and you've got like the travel the days before, the nights before. 13, like that is like a quarter of your weekends of the year. It's insane.
It's also like a full-time childcare bill. If you're spending $1,000 average on all of those weddings, like some of them you might spend more, some you might spend less. That's like a huge sum of money over the course of a year. And like that figure might sound outlandish, but I was talking to someone about this the other day because they were saying that a friend of theirs was getting married and they were having quite like a short lead up to the wedding. They're having a destination wedding and an abroad hen do. And I just think you've got to pick one or the other.
Yes.
Sorry.
This is a hill that I'm very happy to die on, and come at me if you disagree, because I have never seen anybody justify how this is okay. Because I think you've got to pick one or the other. And a lot of people, I think, you know, when you've got a connection to a country that is not the UK, I understand that you're going to have a wedding there a lot of the time. Like, it makes a lot of sense. And we've been to a fair few weddings in different countries, and there has always been a connection, which I get. If you're choosing a country that you just like because it's a nice holiday destination, there is absolutely no world in which you should be then thinking it's okay to do an abroad stag or hen.
And I think also if you're gonna do that, in fact, if you're gonna do either of those, you sort of have to accept that some people might not be able to come. And not be annoyed about that.
One thing I have seen a few people do, which again I kind of think is fair enough, is if you want to do your abroad hen with some of your close friends and you've all discussed that that's fine, some people will do that and then do like a smaller at home day type thing, like where it's an afternoon, so the more people can join in if they want to. And I get, part of me is like, that's so extra, but also part of me really understands that actually maybe that is a way to bridge that gap because it takes off the pressure for people that don't have the money or don't want to spend the money to go to the abroad one. I mean, you could just also do the one at home.
Yeah.
But that's a whole nother conversation. But I think that it's the pressure if you don't accept that some people can't afford to do it. They can't find that spare £1,500, £2,000.
Yeah, which is a lot of money.
It's so much money.
Okay, I've got a quick question for you. When you picture somebody that invests, who do you picture?
Be honest, was it a man in a suit? A Jordan Belfort type? Navy gilet on his days off, maybe?
Exactly. And that's the issue that I want to talk about. Because for too long, the world of investing has felt like it's been built for people like them, not for women like us.
Which is why we're so excited that Help Me I'm Poor is partnering with eToro on their Loud Investing initiative. It's all about raising our voices and making sure that other women see that investing is for us too.
Loud Investing was born from a simple idea. If women don't see themselves in the investing space, then they're way less likely to feel like it's something that they should or can do.
Think about it. In finance films or shows, women are usually the wives, the secretaries, the girlfriends. The men are the ones making the big money moves.
And outside finance, we're often painted as the spenders, the ones who are racking up the credit card bills. Confessions of a shopaholic, anyone?
Exactly. But it's time to flip the script because women do invest and we're good at it.
So let's talk about it. Let's be loud about it. Let's show other women from all walks of life that you don't need a finance degree or a pinstripe suit to take control of your money.
Get behind the movement. Let's make investing more visible, more inclusive, and way less Navy gilet.
Thank you so much to eToro for being our partner on Help Me I'm Poor. To find out more, head to the link in the show notes and join us in raising our voices and investing loudly.
And just a quick heads up, all content on Help Me I'm Poor is for information and educational purposes only. It should not be taken as investment or financial advice, personal recommendations, or an offer of any kind. Always do your own research.
eToro is a multi-asset investment platform. The value of your investments may go up or down. With investing, your capital is at risk.
But I also, I suppose a really good question and something that might be really useful for people is like, what do we think you do in that situation when you're being asked to do that? Because obviously we sort of cut from in the film, there's a scene where the idea of flying to Vegas is sort of mooted, and then literally on the same call, it's kind of one of those scenes that we don't get so much in films anymore. There's like numerous people on different lines, and Annie's like cutting between them. But there's the pressure is on immediately, and I know that we have all of this stuff around like boundaries and knows a full sentence and all of this stuff, but when it's like your best friend or someone who means so much to you, how do we have those conversations? How do we navigate it? I still think I've still struggled to come up with an answer to this.
Honestly, I think it is, in this situation, I do think it's a responsibility of the bride to take control of the situation. And I've spoken to various different brides where they've said like, oh, my hen was so expensive, but it was the maid of honor that planned it all. And like, I do feel like that's a bit of a cop out. I think you have to take control of it and say, put your foot down. I do not want this to be over the top. I want there to be a clear budget. I want it to be something that everybody can afford if they want to come, or even to say the opposite. If if you want to go somewhere wild, say like, I'm happy to do this, but I really want to, acknowledge that not everyone's going to be able to come. So please accept that. And, I will communicate that to XYZ person. I don't think you can kind of duck out from that responsibility. If it's your group of friends that are being put in that situation, I think you have to take control of, even if you're kind of not organizing it yourself, which is often the case, I think you can still direct the direction of travel. I think you can say, I don't want people to feel pressured financially. I think you have that control as the bride, and your bridesmaids or maids of honor should respect that.
Definitely. And I think there's also, there are a couple of sort of practical ways that you can do it without, because obviously I think one of the dangers, if you're trying to find out people's budgets, is that people will be like, oh, yeah, that's fine. When secretly they're sort of like, oh my God, how am I going to afford this? And you can do like anonymous polls.
Yes.
So you could do like a doodle poll in your WhatsApp group. You can kind of find, you could do like almost like 3 tiers of Hendy that you sort of pitch out to the group and get them to vote or something like that. I think, you know, obviously you got to strike the balance. It is an important day, but trying to accommodate people while also having a bit of a boundary of like what you do actually want to do, and sort of accepting that not everyone will do it, because money's not the only reason, right? I mean, there are other things. It might just not be someone's cup of tea.
Yeah. And like if you're like in that situation with Annie, if you're somebody's oldest friend, but they've actually got a lot of new friends that they're inviting, you might just be uncomfortable going away with loads of people that you don't really know. And it might just not be your vibe. So I think that equally is like a very valid reason not to want to go. But I think it's the same thing with weddings as it is with hens and stags, that I always say, and I wrote quite a lot about this in my book, but I think that as the person organizing, you really have to pause and ask yourself when you're making these decisions, what is my priority here? Is it that you want to spend that time and make those memories with the people? Or is it that you want to make those specific memories in that place? Because sometimes, a lot of the time, I think it is that trade-off. You know, if you want to go on your hen to Vegas because you're fixed on Vegas, that's fine. But you have to accept that you're not going to be able to do that with all of the people you want to a lot of the time.
Yeah.
And it's the same with destination weddings. I think a lot of the time it's really that choice of what is more important to you, because a lot of the time I think really when people strip it all back, it is about people, and you don't need to be in somewhere really fancy, really flashy a lot of the time to make those good memories. And I think we can really easily forget that when it comes to these big events.
Yeah. And I mean, to be honest, planning this episode and rewatching the film and stuff, it did make me, and I've thought this is something I've thought about before, but it did make me think about my own wedding. So I'm 35 now. I got married when I was 28. And I was the first of my friendship group to get married. And so there wasn't really like a blueprint within our group or within my family for how things were done. So we were just guessing. And we did get like a bit carried away. And I think things were a bit pricey for people. And so I think, I mean, if we were getting married again now, we'd do things differently anyway.
Yeah.
Because we're 7 years older. But I also, it was an amazing weekend. We got married in the Lake District. We made a full weekend of it. So we had a hotel that was like just all of us. It was quite a small wedding. It was only sort of like 60 to 70 people. Can't remember exactly. It's nice, isn't it? Yeah. I think it's nice to have it intimate. And like, I'm always astonished when I see these big, like 250 plus guest weddings. You must like just say hi and bye to everybody. But look, if that's what people want, then that's what they want. But because we got married in the Lake District, people were coming from all kinds of different places. So my husband's from Newcastle. So we thought it's like easy for them to get to. But people were stuck in traffic for like 4 hours coming up from like the Midlands and the South on the Friday. It was a big ask of people. And we tried to give as much as we could. So we paid for dinner on the Friday night, and we tried to make it an enjoyable experience for the guests. And I think that it really was, but it put a lot of financial pressure on us. And I think it still put quite a lot of financial pressure on our guests who, you know, lots of them were in their 20s and maybe in their first grad job or like their second job after graduating, definitely not on like the kind of salaries that they're on now, just a few years later. And so I think, it was a big cause for reflection from me. Not that I like regret anything about it, but I just think I, in some ways, sort of wish that we had been a bit more considerate. And I definitely you know, one day in the very distant future, I am going to be 40. And if I'm planning a big bash, then I think those are things that I would think about, like planning a big party again.
Yeah. It's so true,
but, you know,
though.
you live and you learn.
You live and you learn. And I do think that it is interesting now, again, looking back at the decisions that we made, because I do this a lot as well. And I think, like, what would I do if I did my wedding again? So we've been married nearly 4 years. But we also had to push our wedding back a year because of COVID.
Yeah.
So we had all of that to try and navigate as well. But one of the things I think that I always come back to, and this is probably going to make me unpopular with some people, but I'm going to say it.
No, do it.
Every decision you make when you're planning a wedding, you are choosing whether to take the financial burden on yourself or to put it on your guests.
Yeah.
And the biggest place where I feel like people don't think about this, or they do it, and it makes me uncomfortable, is the day of the week.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
I feel like the only reason you would not get married on a Saturday is because it's cheaper. But the impact of having a wedding on another day of the week, particularly a weekday, is huge on your guests. It's normally okay for you as the couple because you've probably taken the week off as leave anyway. But I just don't think people think this through, or if they do, they're so blinded sometimes by, again, that tunnel vision of what they want, that they'll choose like a Monday or a Tuesday wedding. But that is not only asking your guests to go, like, have annual leave for that day, you've got to factor in the travel. You've got to factor in that they're probably going to have to take the day off after as well.
For the hangover.
If they've got children, like the children are going to have to be in school, or if you take them out of school, you're in trouble. Or you've got to pay for extra childcare. Is such a big ask. And it nearly always comes down to that decision that we want that venue or that type of wedding. And the only way we can do that is to not do it on a Saturday because it's too expensive.
Yeah. Or the other reason actually sometimes is because for some specific venues that are very high end, like for example, Babington House near me in Somerset, and the Pig hotels, they only do weddings on a Thursday, and you have to have like 2 nights, you have to take the whole place. So these are not like cheap weddings, but that's if that's where people want to have them. I suppose maybe if you're operating at that level of expense, maybe people are a bit more loose with their work schedule. Anyway, I don't know. I don't want to make assumptions, but I think it is really interesting. And you're right. Like, that's such a good way of putting it, that every choice that you make, you're choosing whether you take on the cost and what's fair to put on your guests. And I think I was just thinking about what I would do differently while you were talking. And I think the one thing where I definitely would do it differently in 2025 is my wedding dress. So I was very swept up in the like couture, like spending a lot of money, and I love my wedding dress. I've still got it. It's in the cupboard. It has not been dry cleaned, Ellie, so I don't know. It was quite ruddy when we got married, but it's so beautiful. You know, I would love to pass it on to one of my children to do whatever they want with it. But I think that if I got married now, I would definitely look at, there are some phenomenal designers who are doing more affordable options, but also like renting, like using like Her or By Rotation or one of the other brands where you can rent a wedding dress, a really, really special dress. A friend of my aunt's got married like sort of during the like weird lockdown, not lockdown period, just a registry office wedding. And she had like a black bob and she was wearing a green vampire's wife dress, like emerald green. And she looked like the most stylish bride you've ever seen. And I just think I like that people are looking at more alternative ways to get married. Some people are doing like the registry office and then they have a party a little while later. I really love this. And I think Bridesmaids really came out. So it came out in 2011. I got married in 2017. So 6 years later, but I do think that period of time was such like a massive boom of like the Pinterest wedding or the pin board that I had for our wedding. Like everything had to be just so. It was like the era of not on the high street where all of a sudden you could get everything personalized. And
that's so true. I mean, I had my Pinterest like ring board from before I met my husband probably. And to be fair, my ring is exactly like it was on those boards because I left them open. But it's funny. I feel like as we go through this podcast, people are going to really realize how similar we are, which is quite weird because I'm exactly the same. It's the number one thing. And anytime anyone asks me if there's anything that you would change, it's the dress. And I love the dress in that it looks amazing in my photos. And ultimately my photos are what I have. But it costs too much money.
Yeah.
Now, when I think about it, I'm like, oh gosh, like I would love that money to do something else with. But also literally this week, I have been having a conversation with my mum because it's in her loft, hanging up, dirty still because it got muddy. And she's like, what do you want to do with it? Because she's moving and so doesn't want to cart it around. I'm like, I don't know, because I can't give away a dress that costs this much money just to charity, or can I repurpose it? Can I clean it and do something with it? I don't know. I feel really almost like weighted down by this.
Isn't it?
It is, because I'm like, I feel this responsibility to do something useful because it costs so much money. And I just honestly wish that I had just, gone for a really simple design or something like you say, which was high street, or even just something which would be easier to like repurpose. But I really went for like the brides, like the bridal dress, and it was stunning, but it has absolutely no use in my current life. Like I could cut it up and make it into like a cushion maybe, but like
no, you're making me think of that scene from 27 Dresses where the younger sister cuts up. It's been just in my FYP constantly, that scene of you cut up my mom's wedding dress. But at least it's not a lady Juju, because I don't know what she'd do with that dress. Honestly, no idea.
Awful.
And so I suppose there are loads of things that we can take from Bridesmaids in terms of how we communicate about money, how uncomfortable that can feel sometimes, how much we get pressured into things, but also that thing of like, I think, the big theme of the movie is that Annie will not get out of her own way. She just really leans into the downward spiral.
Yeah.
And, her mum, who is like involved with AA, although I think in the movie she's not an alcoholic, she just likes to go. I'm not sure, I can't remember, but she's very much like got the messaging around like you need to hit your rock bottom. And obviously after the bridal shower, when there's this huge blow up and their friendship implodes, and she's messed things up with roads, and her tail light still isn't fixed. And she gets kicked out because her flatmates think that they're too old to be flat sharing with her, even they're just going to carry on flat sharing together. And so she has to move back in with her mum, it feels like. And then she does start to like rebuild her life. And there's kind of a hint that maybe she might like restart her business, because throughout she's sort of working in this jewelry shop and just saying awful things to every customer that comes in because she's so depressed. But I think
you're right, that's the thing. It's like she's not making it easier for herself. She's not trying to help herself.
No. And I think we are big listeners of other pop culture podcasts. On Everything is Content, they were talking recently about kind of the conflict between, the systems that are kind of oppressing us, but also, and we have to acknowledge that they exist, but also the fact that you do, mindset is part of it. You do have to like want to like pull yourself up by your bootstraps.
Like two things can be true at once.
Yeah, exactly. And I think this is what we see. We don't really get to see the rest of Annie's journey. Hopefully she starts a new business and it all goes like really well. She maybe eventually moves out of her mum's house. You don't know.
No.
But I also really hope that they find like a bit of a level with Lillian's kind of newfound wealth, because that's not going away. And Annie probably is always going to be in a more modest situation, because you can't really earn your way to that level of generational wealth that's obviously present in Doug's family. You know, his sister is you know, obviously very wealthy as well. So I think, you know, you got to hope that they kind of work that out.
Yeah,
and
but
it seems like they do.
I think that's a really important point, though, which is that I think it's not about saying that, you know, if your circumstances change, you can't still be really good friends. I think it's just about adjusting and having that kind of empathy and compassion for each other. And I think, again, so often in these conversations, we really focus on the person with more being cognizant of the person with less financially. But I think it works both ways. I think, you know, acknowledging that some of your friends are probably going to go on those flashier holidays, and that's okay. Like, but you're not going to expect to go on them with them, and they're not going to expect you to pay for those types of experiences. It's about having, I guess, an understanding and a communication and finding things that you can do together still, and being, respectful of each other and understanding your differences in circumstances, but that ultimately those are not the things that made you friends in the first place or are going to dictate your friendship going forward. You became friends because hopefully you had these similarities in personality and shared interests, and your circumstances do not have to be your entire personality.
Yeah, 100%. And, you know, we'll go back to sort of what we were saying about Helen. She's like throwing everything at this friendship, and she wishes that she had that lifelong connection that Annie and Lillian have. And that's like what's important. And money can't buy that. I know that that's like a massive cliche, cringe thing to say, but it's so true. So I think that before we wrap up, we always want to include like a little bit of behind the scenes where possible with these things. I think sometimes there won't be any, but with this one, quite recently, in actual fact, there was some really interesting behind the scenes money stuff, because Rebel Wilson went on a podcast and talked about the fact that for Bridesmaids, in which she doesn't play like a massive role, but she's very funny. The scene where she reveals her Mexican drinking worm tattoo had me on the floor still. And you know, it was her breakout role in the US, but she only got paid $3,500. And so she said that by the time, you know, she had to buy her own dress for the awards that the film was nominated for, and she was net negative. Basically, it cost her money to be in that film. And I thought that was a really interesting thing to talk about briefly, because there's the fact that feels very unfair, but also I think Bridesmaids is the first movie that I saw her in, and I think that it did act as a springboard for her career. But should you have to pay for that? You know, it feels all very, you know, like those predatory like modeling agencies that used to recruit people in malls and then get them to pay for their headshots. Like, I think the price of access.
I guess it's quite tricky though. So I think what I feel like is difficult to kind of understand with this is it's really hard to know, because I don't know what, I guess, normal pay for actors and actresses at that level at that time were. Do you know what I mean?
No,
because
I've no idea.
We're now listening to it where she's huge, she's so famous, and obviously now that sounds like such a small amount of money, but actually for a startup actor going into like a small role, was that a fair wage? I actually have no idea.
I'm not sure.
But also on the dress thing, isn't it funny? Because if we were nominated for an award, obviously we'd have to buy our own dress.
Yeah.
Do you not think that's just like such a sign of like Hollywoodism? That
it is a bit, actually,
she's
you're
just
right.
saying like, I had to buy my own dress. Like, that's normal. What's not normal is that Hollywood stars get dressed by these massive couture houses
and paid to wear
stuff. So it's almost like now thinking about what she said, because at the time when I first heard it, I was like, oh yeah, like that's weird. Now when I think about it, I'm like, no, that's not that weird. What's weird is what is now normal in the world that she exists in Hollywood. Because if I went to an award ceremony, you went to one, we'd obviously have to buy, just no one's paying us to wear a dress. And so I guess it just shows how far, I guess, her career has come from that point.
Yeah. And isn't it interesting that of the entire interview that she gave, like that bit has been clipped up for social media. It's gone like a bit viral.
Yeah.
I think that people want to know more about the behind the scenes and the money stuff in the entertainment industry. So
oh my gosh.
For future reps, we will definitely be digging around to look at that. But I think that's pretty much all we've got time for. If you have one money takeaway from Bridesmaids, what do you think it is?
Communicate. I think it really comes down to that. It's so clear in the film that if there was more conversation and openness about circumstances, about money between the characters, so much of the drama could have been avoided. But also in real life, I think if we can talk more openly and use some of those things we talked about, like the polls, or just taking a little bit more control of the planning of these events, then it can really take the pressure off so many people financially and make it a nicer experience for everybody involved, rather than that stress of like, oh my gosh, another invite, how am I going to pay?
Yeah.
But what do you think?
I think the same. I think the kind of risk of resentment if you don't communicate properly is so high. And yeah, basically, I think what we're saying is that this could have all been avoided if Lillian had just put a doodle poll in that WhatsApp group.
Absolutely. That is a perfect way to sign off. So thank you so much for listening. And we hope you have enjoyed the first episode of Help Me, I'm Poor as much as we have enjoyed chatting about all things bridesmaid and money.
If you did enjoy it, please rate, review and subscribe. In your review, if you want to, instead of doing a usual review, you could just drop a suggestion for something that you want us to cover in future. We are very open to ideas. We would also love to see you on our socials, which you can find us at Help Me I'm Poorcast on Instagram and TikTok. And because we're a new podcast, we are very much relying on word of mouth. So if you did enjoy it, also please tell a friend, and we will see you next week. Bye.
Bye.